Listen close, because tonight I'm telling you a tale so fierce it still echoes across the high plains. This is the American West in winter's cruelest grip, where blizzards don't whisper, they roar, where frozen creeks hide under glass ice, and every shadow could be the last thing you see. A place where destiny doesn't arrive on horseback. It crashes through like a runaway freight train. It began with the sound of a door slamming shut on two kids who had nowhere left to run. One boy, one little sister. One broken-down school bus half buried in snow. Like, if you're ready to ride this one out to the end. And comment below. Where in this big, hard land are you joining us from? The fight kicked off in the kitchen, same as it always did. At first, just low murmurs, then hard, cutting words that sliced right through the thin walls. Zephyr Flint perched on the edge of the narrow bed he shared with his little sister, retying the frayed lace of his boot for the third time. Tiva watched him with big, frightened eyes, her small fingers twisting the worn cuff of her sweater. "Don't move," he whispered. "I'll be right back." But before he could rise, the bedroom door banged open. Vesper Thorne, his stepmother, stood framed in the doorway like a thunderhead rolling in. Her face was pale and drawn tight, her jaw locked in that way that said arguing was pointless tonight. "You two need to get out," she said, voice flat and final. "I'm done. I can't keep doing this." Zephyr's chest squeezed hard. "Go where?" She didn't answer right away. She just folded her arms and stared past them at the wall, as though meeting their eyes took more strength than she had left. "Your father's gone," she said at last. "No money left, no space. I've done all I could." Tiva slipped off the bed and pressed herself tight against Zephyr's side. "We'll be real quiet," she said in a tiny voice. "I promise I won't make any more noise." Vesper's gaze flicked down, but there was no softness there, only bone-deep weariness and something sharper underneath. Resentment. Maybe fear. "I said get out." Zephyr stood, forcing himself to look taller than he felt. At 15, he'd already learned how to read a room by the silences in it, the way other boys read trail markers. This wasn't a warning. This was the end of the line. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply reached under the bed, dragged out the old canvas pack, and started stuffing whatever he could reach. 2 threadbare sweaters, half a loaf of bread wrapped in a faded dish towel, Tiva's toothbrush, the thin blue blanket she clung to every night. Outside, the wind clawed at the house like talons on dry timber. The season's first snow had already begun drifting down. By the time they stepped off the porch, the sky had turned the cold, dull color of gunmetal. The yard looked strange under its thin white veil, as though winter had wiped away every trace of summer in one long, merciless breath. Zephyr took Tiva's small hand in his. They walked down the gravel road without once looking back. Willow Creek was a hard little town. The kind of place where folks knew your name until your father was gone, and your family turned into a burden no one wanted to carry. Store windows glowed gold and warm in the distance, but Zephyr didn't turn toward them. He knew exactly what would happen if they started knocking on doors. Questions, sad looks, maybe a call to some county man in a cheap suit, and county men meant splitting them up. He wasn't letting that happen. They veered off the road and slipped into the trees at the edge of town. Pine limbs hung heavy with fresh snow. The forest smelled sharp and clean, cold iron and raw pine sap. Tiva stumbled once, her boot sinking deep into a drift. Zephyr caught her before she went down. "Easy, little one," he said softly. "I've got you." "I'm not tired," she lied, her breath coming out in quick white puffs. He wanted to believe her so badly it hurt. They kept walking until the town lights vanished behind them, until the only sounds left were the low moan of wind and the far-off creak of trees bowing under the weight of snow. That was when they saw it. An old school bus sat crooked between two towering pines, half swallowed by drifts and eaten through with rust. Its yellow paint had long ago faded to a sickly, washed-out shade. Windows were either cracked or gone completely. A dead branch had crashed across the roof years earlier, buckling the metal inward like an old scar that never closed. Tiva pointed, voice small. "A school bus." Zephyr stared. His mind didn't fill with panic. It filled with hard, fast calculations. Walls, roof, a door he could shut and bar. Even broken, even rusted, it was something solid in a world that had turned hollow overnight. "Better than nothing," he said. They climbed in through the rear emergency door. The air inside was thick with dust and the stale smell of old rubber. Seats were ripped open, yellow foam spilling out like ancient bones. Snow had blown through the broken windows and laid thin white stripes down the center aisle. Zephyr dropped the pack and rubbed his hands together hard. "Okay," he said, trying to sound surer than he felt. "We can make this work, at least for tonight." Tiva curled up on one of the seats, hugging her knees tight. "Are we gonna die out here?" The question landed like a fist in his gut. "No," he answered fast. "No, we're not. I swear it." Easy to make a promise. A whole lot harder to keep one. He draped the blue blanket around her thin shoulders and shaped the bread and towel into a makeshift pillow. Then he got to work. He shoved two torn seats together to block the biggest broken window. He crammed ripped foam into the widest gaps to choke off the wind. He found an old cardboard box up near the driver's seat, flattened it, and laid it over the icy metal floor beneath Tiva's feet. Every move was careful, focused. If he stopped moving, fear would catch up. Outside, the snow thickened fast. By the time full dark settled in, the bus was wrapped in a deep, heavy quiet. The view outside the cracked windows dissolved into a swirling white nothing. Tiva shivered hard, her small frame trembling under the blanket. Zephyr climbed up onto the seat beside her, wrapping his arms around her tight and drawing the thin blue cover closer against the creeping chill. "Tell me a story," she whispered. He paused. Stories had always been Rufus Grimm's job, his father's deep voice spinning tales by the fire. But tonight the words were his to find. "Once upon a time," he began slowly, voice low and steady, "there was a fortress carved right out of the snow, and inside lived two trailblazers who could conjure fire from thin air and never backed down, no matter how fierce the cold turned." Tiva managed a faint smile and leaned her head against his chest. He felt her heart fluttering quick and light, like a trapped bird. The wind rocked the old bus, rattling a loose metal panel overhead like a warning drum. Zephyr stared into the blackness, forcing his mind toward tomorrow. Food, warmth, some kind of plan. Right now, all he had was his sister curled in a dying school bus. But as the night deepened and the cold sank its teeth in deeper, something shifted inside him. Not wild panic, not hot rage. A hard, quiet stubbornness took root. No one was riding to their rescue, so he'd figure out how to save them himself. Outside, the snow kept falling, relentless and unforgiving. Inside the rusted husk of the bus, a boy held his sister close and swore winter wouldn't claim them. And in that narrow space between terror and grit, a shelter was quietly born. Morning arrived pale and colorless. Zephyr woke to weak gray light seeping through the broken windows. His arms had gone numb from cradling Tiva all night. His legs felt heavy, like they belonged to some old prospector. For a heartbeat, he forgot where they were. Then the cold hit him like a slap. Sharp, real, and memory flooded back. Tiva still slept, face tucked into his jacket, her breath rising in faint white puffs. Careful not to wake her, he eased his hold and slid off the seat. The metal floor stole the heat from his boots the instant his feet touched down. Outside, snow had climbed halfway up the wheels. The forest stood locked in ice, as though the whole world had been paused with one brutal stroke. Zephyr rubbed his hands briskly and scanned the bus interior. In daylight it looked even smaller, more wrecked. Wind sneaked through the gaps like a pickpocket, robbing every scrap of warmth they'd managed to hold. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "We need heat." He remembered something Rufus Grimm had said years back while patching an old cook stove out behind the house. "Fire don't care where it's born. It just needs a safe corner to live." Safe. That was the hard part. Zephyr pushed open the bus door. The hinges shrieked in rusty protest. Frigid air rushed in, stinging his face like needles. He circled the bus, kicking aside drifts and dead leaves. Near the tree line, he spotted the wreck of an old maintenance shed. Nothing left but a leaning wall and a collapsed roof. Inside the ruins lay a miner's jackpot of junk. Rusted lengths of pipe, a battered paint can, and a small metal drum with one side rotted clean through. He hauled the barrel back through the snow, carving a crooked path behind him. When Tiva stirred awake, she found him kneeling inside the bus, rock in hand, working on the drum. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice thin and quivery from the cold. "Building us a heater," he answered, forcing confidence into the words. He hammered holes along the barrel's sides, slow and deliberate. Each strike rang out sharp in the quiet. By the time he finished, his fingers were raw and shaking. Together they gathered armloads of sticks and splintered boards from the forest floor and the shed's wreckage. Zephyr stacked the wood inside the barrel and struck his last match from the old pack. The flame caught. For one bright second, it felt like triumph. Then smoke poured in thick and choking. Tiva coughed right away, eyes streaming as she pressed her sleeve to her mouth. Zephyr's heart clenched. He shoved the barrel toward the nearest broken window, praying the smoke would escape. It didn't. The bus filled with gray, burning haze. "Out, now!" he barked. Tiva stumbled outside with him, both of them hacking and blinking against the sting. Behind them, the barrel fire snapped and hissed, useless and deadly in the enclosed space. Zephyr slammed the door shut. They stood there a long moment, chests heaving. "I messed it up," he said quietly. Tiva shook her head. "You tried." Trying wasn't enough when the cold was closing in. They dropped onto a fallen pine log, huddling together under the thin blue blanket. Wind whispered through the trees around them. Zephyr stared at the bus and felt a heavy weight settle deep in his chest. Not fear this time, but the iron grip of duty, the kind that never lets go. He glanced down at Tiva's boots. The soles were split, cracked open. Her hands were red and chapped raw. "We can't just sit here," he said. He headed back into the woods, pushing farther this time. He found a shallow dip in the earth where the snow lay thinner. With his boot, he swept it aside and uncovered dark, unfrozen soil beneath. That discovery stopped him cold. The earth down there held a faint warmth. Not hot, but far from the knife-edge bite of the air above. He dropped to one knee and laid his palm flat against it. Solid. Steady. "Tiva," he called softly. She came over slow, wary steps, crunching snow. "Feel this." Her small hand pressed into the dirt. "It ain't froze solid," she whispered, wonder creeping into her voice. Zephyr scanned the ground behind the bus. The forest floor dipped away, gentle, vanishing under drifts and a carpet of fallen pine needles. He kicked harder this time, boots scraping until more dark soil broke through. A plan sparked to life in his mind, rough, raw but real. That afternoon, they made do with whatever scraps they had. Zephyr spotted a rusted shovel blade half buried near the shed ruins and lashed it to a sturdy branch with strips torn from a bus seat, fashioning a crude digging tool. He started scraping snow and topsoil away from the rear of the bus, uncovering what looked like the ghost of an old mechanic's trench, maybe dug decades back for working under engines. It wasn't deep yet, but it was a beginning. They dug until every muscle screamed. Dark, damp earth mounded up beside them in wet clumps. By the time the sun dipped low, they'd carved out a narrow burrow just wide enough for Tiva to hunker down inside. She crawled in and let out a soft, surprised laugh. "It's like a real cave." Zephyr cracked his first real smile of the day. A warm one. They roofed it over with splintered boards and a stiff sheet of plastic scavenged from the shed wreckage. Then they nudged the bus's rear end right up against it, letting the big metal body stand as a windbreak. Inside the hollow, the air changed. Still, sheltered, almost gentle. Zephyr hauled the barrel stove outside and set it close to the burrow's mouth so heat could sink downward instead of choking them inside. Smoke curled up clean into the branches this time. Not perfect, but it worked. Enough to breathe. Enough to live. That night they slept half in the bus, half in their new earth den, tangled together under the blanket and Tiva's coat for extra warmth. The wind roared over the bus roof like a freight train, but down in the hollow it barely touched them. Tiva's voice drifted up in the dark. "Is this our house now?" Zephyr paused, throat tight. "It's a start," he said quietly. He lay awake long after her breathing evened out, ears tuned to the low pop of the fire and the far-off creak of snow-laden trees. Tomorrow they'd need real food, more fuel, a way to keep the air clean. But tonight the cold hadn't won. That small victory cracked the door open for hope. Outside, the forest held its ancient hush. Down in the hollow beneath the broken bus, a boy began to understand. Survival wasn't waiting for rescue. It was carving safety out of nothing, one hard choice at a time. By morning the fire had dwindled to a dull orange glow. Zephyr woke to Tiva's soft coughs beside him. The air in the burrow hung thick and damp, laced with smoke and the rich smell of wet soil. He sat up slow, careful not to jostle her, and watched the thin gray thread of smoke drift toward the gap where plastic met rusted metal. Still not enough. They'd made it through the night. Barely. He crawled out into the open, stood, and stretched his aching back. In daylight, the bus looked more crooked than ever, settled deeper into the fresh snow like it was giving up. A new blanket of white had fallen overnight, wiping out every track they'd made the day before, as if their work had never existed. Zephyr scrubbed a hand over his face and exhaled slow. "We gotta do better." He circled the bus again, stomping circulation back into his feet. Near the rear axle, the snow lay thinner. He kicked it aside, and there it was again. Dark, unfrozen ground. The same solid earth from yesterday. The idea hit harder now. Not just a shallow dip, but a proper space. A real one. He ducked back inside and shook Tiva awake, gentle. "Hey, kiddo, we got digging to do." She blinked up at him, hair wild, cheeks pink from sleep. "Are we leaving?" "Kinda," he said. "We're going deeper." They finished the last of the bread, stale and hard as stone, and sipped melted snow warmed by the barrel fire. It wasn't much, but it fueled the morning. Zephyr dragged the makeshift shovel back to the rear of the bus. He showed Tiva how to scrape snow clear using a flattened strip of seat metal. Together they cleared a wide ring until bare earth showed all around. Hours passed. Fingers numbed, shoulders burned, dirt caked their boots and smeared the knees of their jeans. But inch by inch, the pit deepened. Zephyr worked mostly quiet, counting breaths to keep his thoughts from racing ahead. Tiva hummed little tunes while she scooped soil into the old pack and dumped it on the growing pile beside the bus. By mid-afternoon, the hole was deep enough for Zephyr to crouch inside without scraping his head on the roof. The walls were rough and uneven, but they held firm. Pine roots snaked through like thick veins. He sliced around them, careful with a shard of broken glass, scared to bring the whole thing down. Tiva peered over the edge. "This is a whole lot better than yesterday." He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "It keeps the wind pinned down." That was the secret. They spread cardboard scraps and torn seat cushions across the floor, then layered on pine branches and more fabric scraps. It wasn't a proper floor, not yet, but it was progress, something solid underfoot. As the sun sank low, the cold rushed back like an old enemy. Zephyr dragged the barrel stove nearer the burro's mouth and shoved the bus's rear end a few inches with his shoulder, turning the big metal body into a shield against the worst gusts. Smoke drifted upward now, threading quietly between the pines like a thin gray flag signaling life. They crawled into the burrow side by side, blanket pulled tight around them. The air inside felt changed, still enclosed, but no longer sharp enough to cut. Tiva reached out and brushed the dirt wall with her fingertips. "Feels like a real room," she murmured. Zephyr glanced around. The roof was nothing fancy, just salvaged boards, a sheet of plastic, and a cap of snow. The walls were rough brown earth. Light flickered in from the small opening where the fire glowed outside. "It is a room," he said softly. "Just one we dug ourselves, down under the ground." That night the wind screamed over the bus roof, shaking the metal like a loose tin can in a gale. Snow slid down the sides and thumped gently against their makeshift ceiling. But down in the earth, nothing shifted. The ground held steady. Zephyr stayed awake, ears tuned to every sound, the low pop of embers, Tiva's slow breaths, the faint settling of soil around them. For the first time since they'd been pushed out the door, he didn't feel winter pressing in to crush them. The next morning broke clear and hard, sky a brittle blue, cold sharp as a fresh blade. Zephyr climbed out and ran his hands along the pit walls. Firm. Edges frozen solid, but the core held strong. He needed them tougher. Back at the shed, ruins he scavenged more boards, splintered fence pieces, and a chunk of an old fallen door. He hauled them over and stood them upright inside the burrow, wedging them tight between roots and packed dirt. Tiva handed him strips of bark and torn seat fabric to cram into the cracks. "This stops the dirt from sweat and moisture," he explained, echoing half-remembered words Rufus Grimm had once used about root cellars. "What's that mean?" Tiva asked. "Means the cold can't sneak in so quick." They kept at it until hunger gnawed deep in their bellies. For midday, they boiled snow in the dented can and stirred in the last crumbs of bread, turning it into a thin, pale broth. Tasted like almost nothing, but the warmth spread through them like medicine. Come afternoon, Zephyr turned his eyes to the fire. The barrel still belched too much smoke. He studied how it rose, paused, then curled back toward them. "Smoke wants to climb," he muttered to himself. "So let it." He scrambled onto the bus roof and traced the smoke trail to a narrow gap between the dented metal and a fallen branch. He pried it wider with a rock, then jammed one of the shed's rusted pipes into the hole, tilting it skyward like a bent finger pointing up. He pulled the lower end down to the burrow entrance and buried it angled into the dirt. When he lit the fire again, the smoke hung a second, then shot straight up the pipe. Tiva clapped her hands, eyes bright. "It's a chimney, sort of." Zephyr felt a surprised grin tug at his mouth. "Yeah, sort of." That night the burrow stayed clearer, the air still rough, but it no longer stung their eyes. They slept deeper, longer. On the third morning, Tiva's whisper pulled him awake. "Zephyr, I hear something." He listened. At first, just wind, then a faint scratching, distant, out beyond the trees. His muscles locked tight. He grabbed the metal shard he'd used for digging and eased out of the burrow. Snow lay smooth and untouched around the bus, except for one delicate line of tiny tracks. Rabbit. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The sight lit a fire in his gut. Real food. He remembered a trick from some old survival show back in school. Wire loop, springy branch, tight path. By noon, he'd rigged 3 rough snares where the prints vanished into the brush. Clumsy, uneven, but his own. When he got back, Tiva had scratched a drawing on the dirt wall with a charred stick from the fire. A crooked little house, 2 stick figures, a big sun overhead. "What's that?" he asked. "Our house," she said simply. "So it knows we're living here." The words struck him deeper than he expected. That evening, snow fell again, thick and lazy, filling in their tracks and rounding off the forest's sharp edges. Inside the burrow, the fire burned steady. The walls stood firm. The air felt warmer than any night before. Zephyr lay awake, staring up at the boards, plastic, and packed snow overhead. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were reshaping the ground around them, turning nothing into something meant to last. Tomorrow he'd check the snares. Tomorrow he'd brace another board into the wall. Tomorrow he'd raise that chimney higher. Piece by piece, the place under the snow was turning into more than a hole. It was becoming a home. And for the first time since that door slammed shut behind them, Zephyr believed it just might hold. Zephyr woke before the embers stirred. The burrow lay quiet, except for the faint hiss of dying coals and Tiva's slow, even breathing beside him. For a long moment he stayed still, listening to how the earth seemed to cradle every sound instead of bouncing it back. It felt different now. Not a hideout anymore. More like a room that remembered their names. Zephyr slipped quietly from beneath the blanket and crawled toward the entrance. Outside, the forest had transformed once more. Snow had drifted into long, gentle swells around the bus, smoothed by the night wind. Sunlight sliced through the pines in thin, pale shafts. The air bit sharp enough to burn his lungs with every breath. He shrugged into his jacket and set off for the snares. The first trap sat empty. So did the second. At the third, the wire noose had drawn tight. Zephyr went stock still. Then he spotted it. A rabbit stretched out in the snow, gray fur dusted white, body half buried. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard it ached. He knelt slow, reached out, and touched it. Real. Still warm enough to mean the kill was fresh. "Tiva," he whispered, already running back. "We got one." She scrambled out of the burrow, hair a wild tangle, eyes huge. "You caught it?" "We did." They stood over the small form together, emotions crashing in waves. Relief first, then a flicker of fear, and beneath it all something like quiet pride. Zephyr worked careful with the pocket knife he'd carried since summer days. He turned his face when he could. She did the same when she needed to. Words stayed few. The forest stood silent witness. By the end his hands shook, but they had fresh meat bundled in a clean rag and a small pelt folded neat beside it. That night they melted snow in the battered can and dropped in chunks of rabbit. Tiva tossed in a handful of pine needles. "They smell like Christmas," she said. The broth came out thin and smoky, but hot as hope. It tasted like a banquet. They ate cross-legged on the cardboard floor, backs braced against the earthen wall. "We ain't starvin'," Tiva said soft. Zephyr nodded. Not today. The days that followed melted into one long stretch of labor. Zephyr braced the walls thicker with extra boards and layers of bark. He tamped dirt into every crack with bare hands until the surface felt like stone. He lifted the chimney pipe higher, stacking flat rocks underneath so the smoke had to climb before it could escape. The burrow grew deeper, wider, tougher. Tiva swept the floor with a bundle of twigs lashed tight with seat fabric. She arranged their few possessions on a plank shelf. The knife, the matches, the tin can, the little heap of charcoal. She added more drawings to the wall. Pines, a bright sun, 2 stick figures with hands clasped. Zephyr passed on what he learned each day. "Dirt holds the heat in," she'd repeat after him. "Smoke's gotta go out," he'd add. "So we can breathe," she'd finish. It turned into their private code. By week's end, the shelter no longer carried the sharp stink of fear. It smelled of wood smoke, damp earth, and roasted meat. It smelled like something that was theirs. Then voices drifted in. Zephyr caught them first, distant, floating through the trees. "Hey, you see this?" He froze beside the chimney pipe, heart leaping into his throat. Tiva looked up. "What is it?" "Stay put," he said low. Boots crunched closer on snow. 3 shapes stepped from between the pines, bundled heavy in coats, breath clouding white. Town kids. Zephyr knew one on sight. Amos Cade, who used to slouch 2 rows back in science class. "Well, damn," Amos drawled, nodding at the bus. "What's this, a junkyard fort?" Another kid snorted a laugh. "You hold up in there, Flint?" Zephyr stepped into the open, his hands balled into fists inside his sleeves. "We ain't bothering nobody," he said flat. Amos cocked his head. "You living in a hole now?" The third boy leaned in, squinting at the crooked pipe. "That thing gonna explode on you?" Tiva appeared at Zephyr's side, her hand finding his. Amos's smirk faded a touch. "She's just a little kid," he said, suddenly less cocky. "Y'all ought to head back to town. Let folks help." Zephyr's jaw clenched hard. "We don't need help." The boys traded glances. "Suit yourselves," Amos shrugged. "Just don't end up froze stiff out here like fools." They turned and walked off, laughter trailing behind, until the trees swallowed it. Zephyr didn't budge until the forest went quiet again. Tiva's voice trembled. "They think we're stupid." He dropped to one knee in front of her. "They think that 'cause they don't understand what we're building. That don't make it so." She nodded, but her gaze stayed on the ground. That night Zephyr lay awake longer than usual. Amos's words looped in his head like a bad refrain. "Go back to town." Town meant prying questions. Town meant rules. Town meant getting torn apart. He pressed his palm into the dirt wall and felt its cold, unyielding strength. "We're all right," he whispered into the dark. "We're all right." 2 days later, the storm rolled in. The sky shifted from dull gray to blinding white in under an hour. When the wind slammed the bus, the whole frame groaned like it might give way. The snow came down in heavy sheets, like the sky had ripped open and was emptying itself all at once. Zephyr jammed boards across the burrow's mouth and lashed them tight with strips of torn cloth. The fire burned low but steady, its warm glow dancing off the dirt walls like lantern light in a mine shaft. They sat close, knees brushing, the chimney pipe rattling with each hard gust. Smoke still climbed, though slower now, lazy against the storm's fury. Night fell, and the blizzard refused to quit. The wind screamed so fierce it swallowed Tiva's soft humming. Zephyr fed the flames one stick at a time, careful not to burn through their small pile of wood too fast. His eyes stung from smoke and exhaustion. "Zephyr?" Tiva whispered. "Yeah? You think the bus is gonna cave in on us?" He glanced up at the ceiling. Snow weighed heavy on the boards overhead, pressing down. But the earth walls stood unmoved. "Nah," he said. "It's holding." And it was. The ground around them shouldered the load like an old mountain. The wind swept over the bus and slid past their burrow smooth as water over river rock. They slept in fits and starts, jolting awake whenever the fire dipped low. Come morning, the world had gone deathly quiet. Zephyr crawled out and stared. The bus sat half-swallowed by drifts, snow piled right up to the windows. The forest stretched out smooth and blank, like a fresh sheet of paper waiting for tracks. Their crooked chimney pipe still poked through, trailing a thin thread of smoke into the pale sky, proof they were still kicking. Tiva crawled out behind him. "It didn't fall." "No," he said. "It didn't." They clawed the burrow opening clear with bare hands. Snow burned their skin like fire, but they laughed anyway. Sharp, tired laughs that cut through the hush. Later that afternoon, footsteps crunched again. Not the cocky tread of town boys this time. A woman stepped from the trees, clutching a small boy tight to her chest. Her coat was threadbare, her face flushed raw from the cold. She stared at the bus, then at the rising smoke. "Hello?" she called. Zephyr moved forward slow, cautious. "I'm Nahimana," she said. "Power's out at our place. Heaters quit. I saw your smoke from the road." She glanced at Tiva. "Is it safe in there?" Zephyr hesitated, then nodded once. "It's warm." They led her and the boy inside the burrow. The kid stopped shivering almost the second the heat hit him. Nahimana rubbed her hands near the fire and let out a long, trembling breath. "Didn't figure anybody was living way out here," she said. Zephyr didn't reply. He just fed another stick to the flames. They stayed an hour, until the wind eased enough for her to chance the road again. Before she left, she dug into her pocket and pulled out a granola bar and half a sleeve of crackers. "Here," she said, "for your sister." Tiva took them with both hands, eyes wide. That night, as snow drifted soft against the outside, Zephyr sat by the fire and turned the moment over in his mind. They hadn't hidden today. They'd been seen. And for the first time, their place under the snow had done more than keep them alive. It had sheltered someone else. He looked at Tiva asleep against the wall, cracker crumbs dusting her sleeve like fresh snow. The burrow wasn't just their secret anymore. It was turning into something folks needed. Deep in his chest, beneath the worry and the endless cold, a quiet certainty took root. Winter hadn't broken them. Not yet. Next morning, the burrow smelled of smoke and crushed crackers. Zephyr woke to Tiva's elbow, jabbing his ribs, and the sound of her chewing. "You're eating the last one," he mumbled. She froze mid-bite. "You said I could." He sighed and pushed himself up. "I did. Just didn't figure you'd polish it off before I opened my eyes." She grinned, crumbs clinging to her lips. "Tastes like peanut butter and being safe." That pulled a laugh out of him, even though he tried to fight it. Outside, the storm had left the forest wrapped in deep hush. Snow lay packed hard now, firm enough to walk on without sinking to your knees. Their chimney pipe still breathed a thin ribbon of smoke into the pale sky. Zephyr stepped out to check the snares. First one, empty. Second, empty. Third, the wire had snapped clean. His stomach dropped like a stone. He tracked the broken line into the brush and found only churned snow and a dark smear where something had fought free. "Not again," he whispered. Food wasn't some tomorrow worry anymore. It was right here, right now. When he got back, Tiva was sweeping the floor with her twig broom. "Did we get one?" "No," he said. "It got away." She nodded slow, like she already knew what that meant. They shared a cup of warmed snow and a handful of pine nuts he'd scraped from cones the day before. It wasn't much, but it kept their hands moving and their bellies from growling too loud. By afternoon, Zephyr pushed farther from the bus than he ever had, following the iced-over creek downstream. He cracked through the thin crust with his boot heel and scooped out the tiny minnows trapped beneath. His fingers first burned like fire, then went dead numb. He tucked the little fish into his pockets like hard-won gold nuggets. When he got back, Tiva let out a squeal. "They're so tiny!" "They still count," he told her. They boiled them whole in the dented tin can. The broth came out tasting of metal and smoke, but it was warm and slick with oil. Tiva wrinkled her nose at the flavor, but drank every last drop. That night, Zephyr lay awake, eyes fixed on the dirt ceiling overhead. They couldn't keep scraping by like this, day after day, guessing at luck, praying it held. They needed more than chance. They needed a real plan, a system that didn't leave everything to the wind. 2 days later, he slipped up bad. He spotted a set of bigger tracks, deer, maybe, and followed them deeper into the woods than he meant to go. The sky slammed dark without warning, heavy clouds sliding over the sun like a trap door closing. When he turned to head back, the bus had vanished. Not gone, just swallowed whole by snow and trees. His chest squeezed tight. He tried retracing his own boot prints, but the wind had already swept them clean. The forest looked identical in every direction. Gray trunks, white ground, no landmarks. "Think," he told himself. "Just think." He spotted the frozen creek and followed it upstream, counting steps the way Rufus Grimm had taught him on long-ago hikes. 100. 200. When the crooked bus finally broke through the trees, familiar, battered, still standing, relief slammed into him so hard his knees nearly gave out. Tiva stood outside the burrow when he reached it, coat pulled tight around her small frame. "You were gone forever," she said, voice shaking. "I got turned around," he admitted. Her eyes filled fast. "I thought the snow took you." He dropped to his knees and pulled her into a fierce hug. "It didn't, and it won't. I won't let it." That night he drove a sturdy stick deep into the snow beside the bus and tied bright strips of cloth to the top, fashioning a flag that could be spotted from a ways off. "We don't vanish again," he said. Tiva nodded solemnly. "Our house needs a flag." 3 days later, the next visitor came. Zephyr heard the heavy boots before the voice. Deep, crunching steps. A man stepped from the trees, coat patched in a dozen places, beard rimed with frost. He eyed the bus, then the steady thread of smoke rising from the chimney pipe. "Didn't figure anybody was holed up way out here," he said. Zephyr stepped forward. Tiva hung back, half hidden behind him. "Truck slid off the road a ways back," the man went on. "Walked till I saw smoke." His gaze flicked to the burrow entrance. "You kids out here alone?" Zephyr hesitated, then gave a single nod. The man exhaled a long breath. Name's Enoch. I plow county roads when the weather ain't trying to kill everybody. You got room by that fire?" They led him inside. Enoch crouched near the flames, broad shoulders easing as warmth soaked in. "You built all this?" Zephyr nodded again. Enoch took in the dirt walls, the braced boards, the crooked chimney pipe. "This is something else." Tiva held out their tin cup of warmed water. He took it careful, like it was fine china. "Power's out across half the county," he said. "Town's a damn mess." He reached into his coat and pulled out a flattened sandwich wrapped in greasy paper. "It's froze solid, but it's food." Tiva stared at it like it was buried treasure. They tore it apart in silence, warming bites over the fire until the bread softened. Before he left, Enoch pointed down the road with a gloved hand. "There's an old ranger station maybe a mile south. Shed out back's still standin'. Might be tools worth haulin'." Zephyr filed the spot away in his head like a map marker. The next week, the shelter changed again. Zephyr made the trek to the ranger station. Inside the shed, he found bent nails, a coil of good wire, and an old tarp stiff as frozen leather. He dragged it all back like spoils from a raid. He built a raised bed frame from broken boards and stacked pine branches underneath, lifting their sleeping spot off the icy floor. Tiva stuffed a worn pillowcase with dry leaves for a mattress. They slept higher now, warmer. Zephyr reinforced the chimney with flat stones and daubed mud into the gaps where smoke used to leak back in. The fire burned cleaner. The walls stayed drier. The burrow no longer felt like a temporary hideout. It felt built on purpose. Tiva carved a sign from a piece of bark with a sharp rock. "Flint House." She hung it inside where only they could see it. One night the wind carried voices again. Not laughter this time. Coughing. Harsh, ragged coughs carried on the wind. Zephyr cracked open the burrow door and found two men from town standing there in the snow. One was doubled over, hands braced on his knees, breath coming in wet gasps. The taller one spoke first. "Our furnace quit on us. We spotted your smoke from the road." Zephyr didn't answer right away. He glanced at Tiva. She looked back, eyes steady. "Come on in," he said. They crowded inside, filling the small space with the sharp smell of frozen wool coats and damp breath. The men's faces softened almost at once as the heat wrapped around them. "Didn't know you kids were camped way out here," one muttered. "We didn't plan to be," Zephyr replied. They stayed until the coughing eased, chests rising easier in the warm air. Before heading out, one of them set a heavy burlap sack on the ground. "Dry beans," he said. "You'll use 'em more than we will." When the men were gone, Zephyr stared at the sack like it might disappear. Tiva reached out and touched it gentle, as though testing if it was real. "We got real food now." He nodded slow. "We do." That night, as beans bubbled low in the tin can and steam climbed the chimney in lazy curls, Zephyr realized the shift. Folks weren't coming to gawk anymore. They came for the warmth, for the thin line of smoke that promised life in the dead of winter. The burrow wasn't hidden any longer. It was a beacon, and beacons drew attention. Good and bad. Zephyr lay awake, listening to the wind scrape across the bus roof and whisper past the dirt walls. They were warmer now, safer, tougher than they'd been. But winter wasn't finished with them. He felt it in the air, in the way the fire devoured wood faster, in the single cough Tiva gave in her sleep before rolling toward him. Their shelter had pushed back against the cold. But the cold was still out there, listening, and deep down, Zephyr knew the real test hadn't hit yet. The deep freeze struck without a whisper of warning. One morning Zephyr crawled out and felt it punch straight through his jacket. The air scorched his lungs, dry, sharp, like swallowing shards of ice. Trees stood rigid and silent, branches encased in white, so thick they might have been chiseled from marble. Even the creek had gone quiet, frozen solid. Tiva followed him out, rubbing her arms hard. "It hurts to breathe." "That means it's turned real mean," Zephyr said, though he had no true measure of how bad it had gotten. He checked the chimney pipe. Smoke still rose, thin but steady. Inside, though, the fire looked smaller, weaker, fighting to stay alive. He fed it more wood, watching the flames flicker and claw like a cornered animal refusing to quit. By noon, the beans in the can had frozen hard when he set them down too long. Their water turned to slush in the cup. "This ain't like before," Tiva whispered. Zephyr nodded. He felt the change, too. Their little victories had held off the cold's lighter punches, but now winter had drawn its heaviest blade. They stayed inside the burrow as much as possible. Zephyr sealed the entrance tighter with extra boards, layering bark and cloth into every seam he could reach. He packed more dirt along the base of the walls, stomping it firm with his boots until his legs trembled. When night fell, the fire burned brighter for a while. But the cold crept closer anyway. The dirt walls no longer felt cool and safe. They felt ravenous, like they might swallow the warmth whole. On the second day, Tiva's cough came back. Dry, sharp bursts at first, just small rasps in her throat. Zephyr pressed warm water into her hands and wrapped her tighter in the blanket and the leaf-stuffed pillowcase. "You all right?" She nodded too quick. "I'm fine." He knew that voice. It meant the opposite. He went out for wood and found the forest changed. Snow squeaked under his boots like dry sand. Branches snapped clean and brittle when he bent them. He didn't stray far. Couldn't risk it. By the time he returned, his fingers had gone white and numb. He thrust them near the fire until feeling roared back in painful waves. Tiva sat up, cheeks flushed in a way that wasn't from warmth. "I dreamed about Dad," she said quiet. Zephyr didn't answer right away. He poked the fire, sending sparks up. "What happened in it?" "He said we were brave," she whispered. "Said we built a house out of nothing." Zephyr swallowed hard. He'd like this place. He'd say it was smart. That night the wind returned. Not the wild howl of before, but a steady, grinding push, like something heavy dragging itself across the frozen land. It shoved against the bus and forced snow into every crack. The chimney pipe rattled hard. Zephyr gripped it with both hands through the worst gusts. Tiva shivered despite all her layers. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I'm bigger," he said. "I can handle it." It wasn't true, but he needed it to be. On the third morning, the burrow door refused to budge. Snow had frozen it shut like iron welded tight. Zephyr braced his shoulder against the boards and shoved hard. Nothing gave. Panic spiked through him, quick and razor-sharp. He snatched the tin can, held it over the fire until the metal glowed dull red, then pressed it to the iced seam. Steam spat and hissed. Thin cracks of melt appeared. After a half-dozen tries, the door finally popped open with a groan. Cold poured in like a live animal, hungry and fast. Outside, the bus was buried nearly to the windows. Their cloth flag stuck up crooked through the drift like a broken arrow. Zephyr dug furiously, sweat turning to ice on his back the moment he paused. He cleared the chimney pipe first, then widened the vent so the smoke could draw clean without backing up. When he crawled back inside, Tiva sat huddled with her knees drawn to her chest. "My head feels funny," she said. He laid a hand on her forehead. It burned hot. The fire popped softly, the sound loud in the tight space. Fear sank into Zephyr's bones, not the wild, yelling kind, but the slow, heavy weight that made every move drag. If Tiva got really sick out here, there was no doc, no pills, just him, the flames, and whatever their dugout home could offer. He remembered what Enoch had said about the ranger station, remembered the sack of beans, the way folks had started coming for warmth. People meant roads. Roads meant help, but help meant questions, and maybe hands that would pull Tiva away and call it mercy. He looked at her, at the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Zephyr didn't sleep. He kept watch over the fire and counted every breath she took. He thought of town. Lighted windows, warm stoves, doors that closed out the cold, and hands that might take her from him forever. "I won't lose you," he whispered into the dark. The fourth day hit colder than anything yet. The sky stayed flat white, like the sun had turned its back on them for good. The air in the burrow turned thin and dry. Zephyr boiled beans down to a thick mash and spoon-fed Tiva until she managed a few bites. Her cough had gone deeper, rougher. Outside, voices drifted in, not close, but carried on the wind. Zephyr froze. Then shapes moved between the trees, two bundled figures trudging slow through the drifts, dragging a loaded sled. He stepped out. "Hey," he called, voice cracking on the cold. They turned. It was Enoch, the plow driver, beard crusted white with frost, and another man beside him. "We saw your smoke," Enoch said. "Figured we'd better check." Zephyr's knees went weak. "My sister's sick. It's bad cold." Enoch's face shifted. "Show me." Inside the burrow, Enoch knelt near Tiva and held his hand close to the fire, gauging the heat. "You done real good, kid," he told Zephyr. "This place is built solid." He reached into the sled and pulled out a thermos. "Hot soup." Tiva sipped it in tiny, trembling mouthfuls. The other man unpacked thick blankets and a small box of matches. "Town's got a warming center running," he said. "School gym, power's back on there." Zephyr stiffened. "We can't go." Enoch studied him a long moment. "You don't want to get split up." Zephyr didn't answer. Enoch nodded slow. "Then we help you right here." They showed Zephyr how to stack stones tighter around the barrel for better heat retention, how to build a thicker wind wall. They widened the chimney and extended it higher with pipe sections from the sled. Before they left, Enoch pressed a small radio into Zephyr's hands. "It only picks up one station. Weather reports. If things turn worse, you'll hear it first." That night, the burrow glowed warmer than it ever had. Tiva slept through without a single cough. Zephyr finally let his eyes close. On the fifth day, the radio crackled to life. "Coldest snap of the season. Below zero through the weekend." Zephyr switched it off. He fed the fire, then checked Tiva. Her fever had broken. She gave him a weak smile. "You didn't let the cold take us." He sat beside her and leaned his head against the dirt wall. "No," he said. "We didn't." Outside, the wind still raked across the bus, and snow still ruled the forest. But inside their shelter, something had shifted for good. They weren't just hanging on anymore. They had stared down the worst of it and held fast. And if they could weather the deepest freeze, Zephyr thought, maybe winter didn't own them after all. It was still deadly, still merciless. But winter had run into something even more bullheaded. A boy, a girl, and a dugout refuge that flat-out refused to flicker out. The cold started easing its chokehold the same way it had clamped down. Silent, no warning, no permission asked. Zephyr felt it first one morning when he crawled outside and the air didn't slash into his lungs like broken glass. Still bitter, still biting, but it no longer carried that murderous edge, like it wanted to snuff out every living thing. A thin ribbon of blue had cracked open in the sky, and the snow threw back light instead of swallowing it whole. Inside the burrow, Tiva was already sitting up, blanket draped around her shoulders like a shawl. "I don't feel dizzy no more," she said. Zephyr pressed his palm to her forehead. Warm, but not scorching. "You're getting better," he told her. Only then did the full weight of how terrified he'd been crash over him like a breaking wave. They boiled beans slow and ate them careful, feeling the warmth spread through their bones like slow whiskey on a cold night. The fire didn't fight anymore the way it had during the killer freezes. It burned even and sure, like it finally trusted the walls to hold. That afternoon, Zephyr scrambled onto the bus roof and brushed snow away from the chimney pipe. Up high like that, he could see deeper into the pines than ever before. The forest didn't look like an enemy anymore. It looked like ground that had thrown everything at them and come up short. When he climbed down, Tiva was tying a scrap of red cloth to their marker pole. "So folks know we're still kicking," she said. "Yeah," he nodded. "So the whole damn world knows." 2 days later, more boots crunched through the snow. Not strangers this time. It was Amos Cade, the same kid who'd mocked them weeks back, and his little sister trailing behind. Both looked worn out, cheeks stung red from the cold. Amos stopped short when he saw Zephyr. "My ma sent me," he said, awkward, shifting his weight. "Heater quit at the house. She heard about this spot." Zephyr didn't answer right away. He remembered the laughter, the way they'd called him a fool for digging a hole to live in. Tiva stepped forward before he could speak. "It's warm in here," she said. Amos swallowed hard. "We won't stay long." Zephyr swung the burrow door open. Inside, the fire glowed steady as ever, dirt walls hugging the heat close. Amos's sister let out a soft sigh the second she stepped in. "Wow," she breathed. Amos looked around, slow, taking it all in. "You really put this together?" Zephyr nodded once. "Had to?" They stayed an hour, thawing hands and feet by the flames. Before heading out, Amos unwound his scarf and held it out. "For your sister." Tiva took it like it was something holy. After they were gone, Zephyr sat on the raised bed and stared at the wall where Tiva had scratched their first little house drawing. They hadn't set out to mean anything to anybody. They just wanted to stay alive. Somehow that had turned into something bigger. Snow started melting in small patches around the bus. The creek murmured again under its thinning ice. Birds came back, wary, quiet, testing if winter was truly done with them. One afternoon, a pickup rattled up to the tree line. Enoch climbed out, waving. "Roads are clear now," he said. "County finally cut through." He eyed the bus, the chimney, the red flag snapping in the breeze, the packed trail in the snow. "You two made it through." Zephyr didn't know what to say to that. Enoch crouched and held out a paper sack. Inside were oranges and a fresh loaf of bread. "School's open again," he said. "Town's warming centers are shutting down." Zephyr felt a knot twist hard in his chest. "So we gotta leave?" Enoch studied him. "That ain't what I said." He glanced at Tiva. "There's a counselor asking after you two, wants to help." Zephyr went rigid. "They'll take her." Enoch shook his head slow. "Not if you don't vanish? Not if folks know you're together?" Zephyr looked at the burrow, the walls they'd raised with their own hands, the fire that had kept beating back the dark, the place that had carried them through the meanest week of all. "What if we ain't ready to go back yet?" he asked. Enoch gave a faint smile. "Then you don't. Spring's on its way. You bought yourselves some time. That night Zephyr lay awake in the quiet. No wind tearing at the metal, no snow hammering the roof, just the soft breath of the fire. Tiva rolled toward him. You think Dad can see this place? Zephyr swallowed. Yeah, I think he can. She was quiet a beat. You think he'd be proud? Zephyr looked around. The rough dirt walls, the chimney pipe, the bed they'd built together. I think he'd say we were brave, he told her, and stubborn as hell. Tiva smiled. I like stubborn, she said. The next week, folks started leaving things near the bus. A tied bundle of split firewood, a heavy sack of rice. A crumpled note scribbled, "For the kids in the snow." Zephyr hadn't asked for a single bit of it, but he put every scrap to good use. One afternoon, Tiva finished scraping a new sign from a strip of bark. This one she hammered to the inside wall where anybody stepping in could see it. Flint Shelter. Zephyr ran his fingers over the rough letters. Why shelter? He asked. She shrugged. Simple as that. 'Cause it keeps folks safe. That night, as the fire danced low and shadows crept up the dirt walls like silent scouts, Zephyr felt something click solid inside him. They'd started with nothing but a busted-up bus and a thin blanket. Now they had a real home. Not the fancy kind with fresh paint and glass panes, but the raw sort forged from sweat, terror, and sheer refusal to quit. Before sleep finally dragged him under, Zephyr stared up at the ceiling and pondered the trail beyond the pines. About school bells ringing again. About a life that didn't reek of constant wood smoke. About what might come when somebody finally demanded their names. He couldn't see how that chapter would unfold. But he knew this much. Winter had come at them with everything it had. And it had lost. The burrow they'd clawed into the earth had grown into more than just a shield. It had turned into proof. Living proof that two kids with no trail map and no backup plan could still carve out a spot where life dug in its heels and held on. So let me put this to you straight. If you were Zephyr, would you have hightailed it back to town? Or would you have dug in deeper and finished what you started? If you were Tiva, would you trust the world again after it kicked you out into the freeze? Or would you only put faith in what your own two hands could build? What would you do if the only thing between you and a killer winter was a wrecked bus and your little sister? Would you have folded? Or would you have built anyway? Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development. The emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.